I guess today what I want to try and do is make a few remarks about the relationship between capitalism and democracy, the theme of this session. But rather than doing so from the prism of evaluating their compatibility, how compatible or incompatible they are, as well-established sociological critics often do, or from the perspective of evaluating the different balancing mechanisms between government and markets, setting the boundaries and moving that boundary in order to address questions of well-functioning liberal democracy. I'm going to take a rather different approach, a provocative approach, which centers on finance as a key component of the internal logics of the capitalist system, which not only shapes the domain of democratic politics, but has a profoundly pervasive influence on our political imagination, which is manifest at the level not only of governments and financial institutions, but at the level of everyday life, everyday social life, everyday political life, everyday intimate life. Our desires are shaped by finance, my argument is. So my approach here today is one that tries to unpick the ways in which finance creates what I call in my recent book, speculative communities. So here is the first provocation. Finance in social and political theory, in critical social and political theory, which is the field that I come from and I in some ways contribute to, is taken as a force that fragments, that depoliticizes, that, in the words of very famous political thinker Wendy Brown, undoes the demos. It splinters, it individualizes, it isolates, it has this effect on undoing social and political ties. Okay? So that is a view that I take issue with. My argument is that although there is an element of truth in that, of course, there is the process that I'm very interested in called financialization. It's a mouthful of a word. It has an economic meaning, how economies are becoming more and more financialized, how the financial market sector of the real economy is increasing. But it has a social and political importance in the ways in which more insidiously financial logics, financial ways of considering value, of thinking about the future, of relating towards uncertainty, towards volatility, towards risk, how all these insidious logics are becoming incorporated in our in ordinary folks' decisions about how to form relations, what kind of education path to take, what work decisions they make, what partners they choose, and so on. So in that sense, I see finance through this process of financialization, not as a fragmenting, not solely as a fragmenting force, but as a generative force, as a generative socially and politically force that is worth examining as such in order to understand a very, increasingly I would say, strange, uncertain, volatile, amorphous kind of politics that we get in liberal democracies. So my argument here is that to understand today's, and I will talk a little bit about one manifestation of this strangeness in our politics today, the so-called diagonalism. The way to understand these weird formations in our political life is to go back and look at how finance insidiously shapes the logics that underpins those formations. So that is the kind of outline of the thesis I will be proposing. There are some sort of philosophical aspects of the argument, so bear with me. I'll go a little bit more abstract. I'm looking to my philosopher friends here for support and criticism. We will see, hopefully more of the former. Let's see, yeah.
Bring it on.
But I'll also talk about, I'll try to ground some of that more conceptual sort of a level register on some interesting empirical examples from spaces and technologies that are used by ordinary people to illustrate how this thesis that what we often do in our everyday lives is we internalize and we express and we articulate the logics of finance. When we go on TikTok, when we go on Instagram, when we go on dating apps, when we go on astrology apps, this is stuff that younger folks do increasingly. So I look at those kind of behaviors as interesting politically behaviors. They have a political imprint and political impact, and they are profoundly informed by the logic of finance. So that's again a second part of that argument that I will try to present to you. So firstly, just a bit more on this view of finance that I'm taking issue with. Finance seen as a vehicle of value extraction, appropriation, and a view that informs many of the mainstream understandings and critiques of finance that typically insist on seeing financialization as implying the decline of capitalism, right? The hollowing out of the real economy at the behest of speculative, fictitious values, the increasing removal, the retreat of the state, and that signifies a retreat from material reality as well as we know it. So I see finance and financial market as a rather messier domain of rich in human and social behavior. There is an obvious link with questions around democracy that is in this memorable phrase, the marketplace of ideas. We still use it a lot. That was coined by famously by Supreme Court Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes in the 1920s, I think, to explain the value of freedom of speech. So he reverted, Judge Holmes, to the market as the space that provides that perfect metaphor for how the circulation of ideas is a vital element of a lively democracy. Interestingly, that judge, and that's something that no one has actually, that I know, has observed, that is the same judge, Judge Holmes, that made another extremely influential decision 20 years before he joined the Supreme Court when he was at the Court of Illinois, which is around speculation at the Chicago Board of Trade. Chicago Board of Trade has plays a key role in my story today, because it's really where I trace the birth of speculation as we come to know it today. Financial speculation as we come to know it, with no boundaries, with trading becoming entirely removed from more traditional forms of stock trading, so the insertion and formalization of complex financial instruments, derivative and future products. Chicago is the first formalized market for those products. These are products that do something very interesting. They circulate and they are being exchanged at one level of remove from assets that can be traced down to foundational material values. So there are promissory notes that are being circulated about, there are contracts about future prices offered ostentatiously to farmers or other producers of real goods that seek to secure themselves against uncertainty of the future. And indeed the radical uncertainty of the future, weather uncertainty, other kinds of uncertainty that might influence production of goods. So these contracts seek to play that role. You buy a derivative that guarantees a price in the future of selling to protect you from that. But where am I going with this? This becomes, around the end of the 19th century in Chicago, it becomes more than just an insurance product against uncertainty. It becomes a betting tool, a gambling tool, a speculative tool, a tool that takes a life of itself. It's an opportunity of profit to trade those contracts, gambling on price differences in future time points. And Judge Holmes, to go back to Judge Holmes, regulates in a very influential ruling, I think in 1898 or thereabouts, that speculation is not to be considered as it was blamed to be fictitious trading, but something that ought to be legitimate and protected as an activity, as a legitimate trading activity taking place within the Chicago Board of Trade. The accusations were raised there, the critique was raised by farmers themselves who were seeing the price of their products being affected not by any real parameters, but by speculative fictitious trading in this behind the walls of the Board of Chicago, the Chicago Board of Trade. So the judge rules there that no, we ought to separate speculation that happens in the trading board, in the Board of Trade, from other forms of gambling, card gaming, gambling in the casino, gambling on the street, and so on. And that is important because it's a key part of American democracy, of American capitalism as we know it. So this is the same judge that makes that ruling on speculation, whose influence is immense to date in the regulatory history of financial markets, and also coins that phrase the marketplace of ideas. So there you have in one judging rule the link that I'm trying to tentatively suggest today, how between the role of finance, and specifically finance as a force that engages with the uncertainty of the future speculatively, in that way of seeking to make profit out of uncertainty, and politics as a domain that is affected by that logic. So as a domain where ideas circulate on the one hand, but as I will argue now, as a domain that entails an openness to questions around uncertain outcomes. And I think there is something here that I will begin to demonstrate around an increasingly obvious behavior, political behavior, that is increasingly speculative, becomes increasingly speculative. A type of politics that becomes increasingly speculative. A type of politics that seeks no clear answers, no definitive programs and models, but rather is comfortable remaining in the realm of chaos, the volatile, the improbable, the unstable. Not only is comfortable, but is happy to cultivate that uncertainty further. We talk about fake news, misinformation, disinformation, the rise of populist politics. What is this kind of politics? What is the narrative of this politics? Can we grasp it? Is it a clear program of policy making towards specifically clearly identified aims? No. Right? Let's take diagonalism. This is a phrase that is coined by my friend, the historian Quinn Slobodian, actually drawing on the German example, drawing on the term Querdenken in Germany. So he has written about this. I'll just read you a little bit his description. We call diagonalism the strategy behind diverse movements of diagonal thinking and the broader phenomenon they represent, diagonalism, bridging more familiar concepts of so he talks about the term Querdenken. The idea of diagonalism exceeds the German context of its coinage, where it means something like out-of-the-box thinking. Born in part from transformations in technology and communication, diagonalists tend to contest conventional monikers of left and right, while generally arcing towards far-right beliefs, to express ambivalence, if not cynicism, towards parliamentary politics, and to blend convictions about holism and even spirituality, wellness, and so on, with a dogged discourse of individual liberties. So what Slobodian describes here with diagonalism is this weird, strange mix of chaotic, tough to define political domains that are bubbling under the surface of institutional, democratic, parliamentary politics. What does this have to do with finance? Okay, I hear you asking. My argument is that these kinds of unexpected and difficult to interpret political formations And in my work, I looked at the decade of 2010s. I looked at the referendum of Brexit in the UK, the rise of Trump and Trumpism in the US. The argument is that these kind of events represent a shift in ways voters, political agents, imagine their futures, how they relate to political narratives and to political promises, specifically to the promise of liberal capitalist democracy. Such imagined futures that motivate them are no longer geared towards stability and the promise of greater security, but rather emerging disjointed narratives that fueled a global rise of a populist right. Narratives are chaotic and uncertain, as I said, yet somehow they make sense, they resonate. Some of the prevalent academic explanations on this kind of political formations, the rise of right-wing populism, for example, makes a very familiar argument in critiquing them. It talks about people who vote against their interests. Why vote for this strange conglomerate of right-wing populists that are clearly, their programs clearly against the interests of those that are, let's say, on the receiving end of years and years of social and economic injustice. So what explains this kind of behavior? And then that framing is paired with casting those voters as irrational crowds, sometimes as delusional crowds, as masses that are atavistic kind of crowds that are drawn to this bizarre cocktail of ideas for reasons that are beyond rational explanation. But I want to examine this paradox, what brings people en masse towards these ideas, these political formations, from a different perspective, and that is the lens of finance. Specifically, in my work, I try to understand how finance has been nurturing a certain way of imagining, what I call the speculative imagination, in society at large. This is a way of imagining that cultivates often disorienting narratives and attendant political behaviors, and how, if we consider these behaviors through the lens of that more speculative engagement of the future, some of the seemingly irrational responses to uncertain outcomes begin to make sense, much in the same way as finances, markets' own speculative endorsement of uncertainty of outcome is perfectly rational when it seeks to capitalize from it. So a key thesis of this argument is that, and it's an observation, a social and political observation, that there is this other big paradox that we're observing today, how swathes of society are immersing themselves in a confusing moment that is uncertain and volatile, not attempting to control or limit that uncertainty. This is the key point here, but rather endorsing it, endorsing uncertainty with their actions and behaviors. And I argue that this is something that lies at the heart of speculative finance, and it is that logic that has been transferred to society writ large. So relatedly, I propose here an understanding of financialization as something that is not merely happening to our economies, but also importantly as a structure that is conditioning and enabling diverse responses, ideas, techniques, imaginaries that in turn are shaping our political futures. So, in other words, financialization entails, or its meaning, the meaning I propose is that of the influence of finance, considering the influence of finance as inseparable from other forces, as indeed inescapable, but not merely as a story of doom, as a story of decline and degradation of democratic values, but also, and this is my final important point, as a story of opportunity, as a story of hope. Let's see how we get there to the hope element. I'll take some twists and turns now, but hoping to arrive at something that gives us some space for thinking around possibility, political possibility, in very gloomy days where liberal democratic politics is under crisis, and where answers, I argue, we need to be looking for answers in other domains of political activity that don't necessarily even look like being political with the lenses that we apply to understand them. So the first thing I want to unpack here is, because it's relevant to this discussion, is my understanding of speculation. So I spoke about finance, and I refer to speculation as a core element of financial markets. Why centering on speculation? Why call these new political communities speculative communities? What is speculative about them? A brief historical journey in terms of history of ideas, but also some specifics of financial history. So speculation is interesting to me because it encompasses a duality, a coupling of two seemingly antithetical notions that are at the core of all financial activity. When pushed to its outermost limit, speculation can unleash formidable destructive forces. That's the stuff of frenzies and fantasies, the burst of market bubbles, from Amsterdam's notorious tulip craze to Victorian era's railway manias, to last century's Great Depression, to the more recent 2008 global financial crisis. That's the stuff where speculation goes unhinged, right? During these periods, market passions, memorably described by the Fed's chairman Alan Greenspan as irrational exuberance, take hold. Traders venerate ethereal values with no material reference, no links to fundamentals. They seem to take leave of reality itself. Yet, speculation is also the market's indispensable lubricant. Speculative trades, in essence, calibrate risks in order to generate yields, and in doing so, they prevent markets from, quote-unquote, overheating. Somewhat counterintuitively then, one of speculation's gifts to markets is stability, not crisis. Absorbing volatility by smoothing out price fluctuations and generating much-needed liquidity. For those in the business of trading, speculation means betting on possible future movement of asset prices, but it also involves dealing in risky assets like derivatives and futures that started off all that time ago in Chicago, with the goal of providing insurance against such price movements. Speculators, in other words, both short and hedge uncertainty. And now to this historical part of the birth of speculation and its importance, its significance to the way our politics is shaped. So markets in global centers of capitalism in the late 19th century sought to expand their financial activities to new domains, to new realms, and they vied fervently for control over the power of speculation. So speculation was a key mechanism for expansion of the financial domain in 19th century capitalism. In the mid-19th century, in 1848, the Chicago Board of Trade becomes the world's first organized exchange for future contracts. And I spoke about them in the beginning of the talk. Just to give you a little bit more description of what these are. I mean, I think most of you probably already know, but for those that are somewhat more outside of that world. So future contracts are standardized agreements to buy or sell an underlying asset, predominantly at the time grains such as wheat from the city's hinterland, at a guaranteed price for delivery at a specific future time. So ostensibly the trading of futures serves the hedging side of speculation. So it functions as an insurance against volatility for farmers whose harvest is exposed to radical and incalculable weather uncertainties. Speculators in that sense step in to take on the unwanted risk at a discount, performing even a social function, while farmers get security and the market remains liquid. Yet, no bushels of grain are being moved because of these trades, and not even actual contracts exchange hands in the CBOT. Soon after the launch of the future contract, the circulation of what was called phantom wheat in the pits vastly overtakes the real grain that is produced in farms. Future traders are engaging in what is called fictitious dealings that are entirely unmoored from the corporeal economy. Is this kind of speculation ethical? Is it different to ordinary gambling? You now know the answer. Judge Holmes ruled that yes, it is, both ethical and different to ordinary gambling. Advocates of future contracts and CBOT's influential allies answered these questions unequivocally in the positive. State courts, as we saw, enshrined the legal right of futures traders to short sell for their alleged positive effect on setting off prices in the real economy, and successive governments sanctioned the promise of even the most fictitious of trades to, and I'm quoting the historian Jonathan Levi, to stabilize an inherently unstable capitalism. So speculation stabilizes an inherently unstable capitalism. But let's look at another side of that coin now. Very important to our story. The bucket shop. We all know what the bucket shop is? Anyone?
I don't know.
Okay, all right. I can luckily I can provide a description. So, speculative bets made in the pit were distinguished from wagers, gambles that were placed outside of incorporated commodities exchanges. And I'm talking here about the phenomenon, a fascinating phenomenon in the time, the mushrooming of bucket shops. So bucket shops are what? They are informal establishments that allow access to anyone who wants to wager small sums on the price movements of stocks in formal exchanges. So you have the stock ticker, and you have the transmission of price movement in these dens. They're very dingy, they're very usually underground, hidden, illegal. Folks go there, often folks of color, often women, the kind of people that are not allowed in the Chicago Board of Trade, and they place bets on the price movements that are being speculated upon in CBOT. So the legal legitimation of formal speculation, on the one hand, positions it as of critical importance to American capitalist democracy. On the other hand, with the other hand, literally, it delegitimizes and seeks to make a distinction between that kind of activity and the gambling that takes place in these dingy bucket shops. So this, as in the gambling in the bucket shop, basically with farmers themselves who seek an opportunity to place bets on that game that is taking place around their own products. With migrant urban workers, with women, groups that are not only excluded from future markets, but were also derided as morally repugnant. So this imagined netherworld of dingy gambling houses serves as a convenient scapegoat to the celestial halls of futures trading. By transposing the evils of speculation to outcast lay bettors, the pit's traders and their powerful allies are buttressing the legitimacy of the American Homo economicus. They cast it as a noble figure and stand it at the helm of American capitalism. Okay, and as I move towards the end, I will say a few words about how this image of the Homo economicus is, for many reasons, no longer a metaphor and a concept helpful in understanding today's speculative economy and speculative politics. But what I want to say here, an additional point I want to make, is that even though speculation in formal financial trading halls is conceived as, it's stripped of its, let's say, irrational or instinctive, the passion, the uninformed motivations of informal speculation, even though, if we look at formal financial trading of the time, we'll find a completely different world of sanitized, rational trading. So both, in fact, my argument in the recent book is that speculative activities across organized exchanges and informal bucket shops have deeper affinities in that Victorian era, and still do. Speculators from all walks of life wielded a vivid imagination to navigate the time's inherent radical uncertainty, the inherent opacity of the future. And to do so, interestingly, they didn't draw on rational calculative methods and models and technologies, even within formal trading, but rather they regularly turned to occult technologies of market prognostication. Their speculations meander through the worlds of magic, superstition, tarot card reading, astrology. Folks like J.P. Morgan, Dow of the Dow Jones, Moody, influential the father figures of American financialized capitalism were avid admirers and followers of occult and magical beliefs. Methods like chartism in economics, technical analysis, their principles transgress boundaries of the rational scientific and reach the irrational and the spiritual. Wall Street traders lined up to hit the predictions of financial astrologers like the notorious Evangeline Adams, while mainstream financial technologies were adopting horoscopic methods that sought to map the movements of markets onto those of stars. My point is that in the dawn of financial capitalism in modern era, speculation created a world that was at once obscure and spectacular, full of stardust and bitter conflicts. A world, importantly, that was far from insulated from broader social and political reality. Speculators, my argument is, were a mirror image of society rather than a deviation from it, reflecting its assiduous drive to lay wagers on the unknown in the face of radical uncertainty. And I think I have only a little bit of time left, and I know you're very strict with timekeeping. This is a world that we recognize today as ours. Following a period of unbridled financialization during the latter part of the 20th century, leading to the financial crisis of 2008, contemporary economies and society are once again steeped into the whirlpool of speculation, and even more intensely this time, with new technologies in their hands to propel that speculative imagination even more forcefully, more pervasively, more spectacularly. So there's a lot more that I could say here, maybe just for the end, because I tantalized you a bit with my TikTok and dating apps and astrology apps. I'll have to just make one important point about this question of which are these political domains that express this kind of imaginary today. And here I make a plea in my work for looking more seriously and with greater attention and sensitivity, fine-tuning our lens of political economic analysis to understand behaviors that are exhibited by younger folks, especially by the Gen Z, folks that are ordinarily seen as apathetic, apolitical, fragmented, isolated, mental health crisis victims, and so on and so on. You know, working in university institutions, we all know about the anxiety and mental health epidemic of our students, their addiction to their phones, their immersions in these fragmented worlds. So I make a rather more positive reading of these spaces. I think they're politically very interesting. And I think the reason why they are interesting is because they don't offer those users any stable narratives. They don't offer any clear answers. They mirror to themselves the uncertain conditions that they all recognize as a key shared condition of their generation. So I think there is something about the way in which platforms are spaces of connection and a shared expression of imaginary. In my work, theoretically, I'm interested in how communities get together, what kind of ideas, what kind of concepts communities coalesce around. And I take the very influential model of Benedict Anderson to explain the nation as an imagined community, that technologies like the print press, the reading of the novel, create that shared sense of who we are, who belong to something bigger. The turn of the page of the newspaper makes every American imagine that there is another 350 million Americans being of the same community. That's Anderson. I claim that our infinite scrolls and swipes on dating apps are another instrument, another technology that circulates and facilitates a collective imaginary. Now, these are financialized apps in terms of their valuations, in terms of their structure, but they also, importantly, and I close with this, circulate financial logics, most importantly, finances speculative imagination, in that they don't offer answers, they immerse us in uncertainty, and they call us to act speculatively on it. Maybe in the discussion I can give some more examples. Specifically, dating apps is a favorite one of mine. As a world that usually we see, oh, it's the homo economicus, maximize utility, find the perfect partner. But no, study after study show that these worlds house more speculative ways of engaging with intimacy and desire. You know, we throw ourselves in it, not necessarily to find the ideal partner, but because we get something out of that out of that infinite swipe. We feel that we are members of that more speculative community. So that is, I think, an interesting connection that can lead us to that can be very fruitful in understanding, not in a dismissing way, how bonds, alliances, relations, communities are formed around speculation. And importantly, that is my very last point. I started 2 or 3 minutes late, no? Importantly, and that's my closing point, who's good at doing speculative politics today? The most regressive forces in society. You know, these diagonal forces, this bizarre mix of, you know, in Germany, AfD, and some of the wellness industry, and folks that believe, you know, climate deniers, and you know, corona deniers. You know, do they have a solid, you know, do they have a solid narrative? No, they mobilize, they weaponize confusion, misinformation, volatility to political gain, and it works. So, what is the answer to this? Is the answer to provide stability, security, a return to the fabled liberal democracy past? I think not. I think we can only enrich that liberal democracy precisely by daring to enter that darker space of weirdness, of confusion, of volatility, the space that finance mobilizes and weaponizes so well. We need to learn from finance, in other words, and adapt our politics in ways that dare to face uncertainty in creative and generative ways. And I'll stop here.